You're sitting there looking at the tuition bill, or the student loan balance, or your kid's college acceptance letter, and you're thinking, is this actually worth it anymore? That question used to feel almost blasphemous. For decades, the answer was obvious. Of course college is worth it. It's the path. It's how you build a future. But now, that certainty is cracking. You see stories about people who dropped out and built companies. You hear about jobs that pay well and don't require degrees. You watch your friend's kid learn to code online for free, while your own is spending $50,000 a year on classes they may never use. And you start to wonder if something fundamental has changed. It has. We're watching one system lose its grip while another one is still taking shape. And in that gap, a lot of us are trying to figure out what the value of education really is. I know something about questioning what we're told. I grew up in the 80s, poor, on welfare, in a broken home where the rules were clear. Do what you're told, follow the path, don't ask too many questions. So I viewed college as an escape route from all that. And in many ways it was. It took 20 years. But with the help of my degrees, I built a successful professional career doing work that requires problem solving, attention to detail, and creative thinking. And unlike most people, I both love my job and I make great money. My degrees acted, in a way, as a passport to a different life. I got it stamped and doors opened. Employers trusted it. But it's not lost on me that much of my success was due to being in the right place at the right time. For many others, that passport won't take them as far. The price keeps climbing, the jobs keep changing, and meanwhile, people are learning to build apps, edit videos, write code, and start businesses without ever setting foot in a lecture hall. For most of the 20th century, higher education was the main road to a better life. You went to college, you got trained, you got hired, you built a career. The whole thing was structured around this idea that knowledge lived in certain places: universities, libraries, professors' offices, and if you wanted access to it, you had to go there. You had to pay for it. You had to spend years proving you could handle it. The system controls access to information, to networks, to opportunities. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, there's really only one way in. And even if you want to do something less clearly defined, work in business, teach, write, the degree is still your ticket. It says to the world, this person is serious. This person can finish something. This person is worth taking a chance on. Part of the reason the system worked so well for so long goes back to the GI Bill. After World War II, under Eisenhower's administration, the government didn't just encourage higher education, they paid for it. Tuition was covered for returning soldiers. Living stipends were provided. Millions of people who never would have stepped foot on a college campus suddenly had access, not because they were wealthy, but because the country decided education was a public good. And that single policy reshaped the entire nation. It created the largest educated workforce the U.S. had ever seen. It fueled an economic boom. It helped build the modern middle class. Teachers, engineers, nurses, accountants, small business owners, people whose lives changed because college wasn't a luxury. It was a right they had earned. It's no coincidence that the decades following the GI Bill saw rising wages, stable careers, and broad prosperity. When you fund education, you don't just help individuals, you expand what a country is capable of. Fast forward a few decades, that investment turning soldiers into scientists led to PCs, smartphones, and the internet. And with it came something that higher education wasn't built for: access. Suddenly, you could study almost anything from almost anywhere. You could watch lectures from top universities for free. You could teach yourself to code. You could take a course and come out with a skill that someone would pay you for. The walls around knowledge started to crumble. At first, colleges didn't seem too worried. A degree was still a degree. It still meant something on a resume. But over time, some employers started to notice. The person with the degree and the person who taught themselves weren't always that different. Actually, sometimes the self-taught person was better, more curious, more resourceful, more used to figuring things out on their own. But here's the thing, the GI Bill worked because the country recognized that a massive shift was coming. Soldiers were returning home, the economy was transforming, and we needed an educated workforce to meet that moment. It wasn't charity, it was survival. We're at another one of those moments right now. The ground is shifting again, maybe faster than it ever has before. And this isn't just speculation from people on the sidelines. This is coming from the leaders building the technology. Google, Apple, and IBM stopped requiring degrees for certain roles. They started looking at portfolios, projects, real work. They started asking, can you actually do this thing we need done? Instead of, did you sit in the right classrooms? Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said that entire categories of jobs will be totally gone as AI systems become more capable. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, put it even more bluntly. Every job will be affected, and immediately. You're not going to lose your job to an AI, you're going to lose your job to someone who uses AI. And then there's Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir. He's been telling people that elite college degrees don't matter anymore, that Yale grads with general knowledge are, in his words, effed, that what matters now is specific technical skill. So Palantir launched something called the Meritocracy Fellowship, a 4-month program for high school graduates. Skip college, they say. Skip the debt. Come work on real projects. Get trained by us instead. It sounds appealing, especially when college costs what it costs, especially when you're 18 and scared of loans. But here's what they don't put in the recruiting materials. Alex Karp has a bachelor's degree in philosophy, a law degree, and a PhD in social theory. He spent years studying, thinking, becoming the person who could build and lead a company like Palantir. He didn't skip that. He didn't take a shortcut. He got the full education, the kind that teaches you not just how to do a job, but how to think, how to lead, how to see the whole board instead of just your piece. And now he's telling you that you don't need it. So we need to be careful here, because not everyone saying you don't need a degree is saying it for the same reasons. When a billionaire tech founder tells you college is a waste of time, it's worth asking where their kids are going to school. Because here's what's happening. The same people who say degrees don't matter anymore are often the ones making sure their own children go to the best universities money can buy. Not for the career training, but for something else. For the time to grow up, for the space to explore ideas, for the network, for the safety to fail and figure out who they are before the stakes get too high. When they say you don't need a degree, what they often mean is, I don't need you to have a degree, because what they're hiring for is a specific skill. They need someone who can code, or design, or solve a particular problem. And for that, maybe formal education isn't necessary. But that's not the same as saying education doesn't matter. It's saying that for the role they're hiring you for, they only care about one part of you, the part that can do the work. But if you want to be the person making decisions, if you want to be the one shaping the company, leading the team, understanding the bigger picture, that's different. That requires something broader. And that's what they're sending their own kids to get. Time to practice thinking, failing, negotiating, figuring out who they are before the world demands an answer. If that kind of growing room matters for kids who already have every advantage, imagine how much more it matters for those of us who don't. If you're coming from poverty, you didn't grow up learning how money works at the dinner table. You didn't watch your parents network their way into opportunities. You didn't get to fail safely, knowing someone would catch you. Which means you need that space to learn and grow even more, not less. I went to Harvard Extension for my master's degree, and if I'm being honest, I didn't learn that much in terms of technical skills. I could have gotten all of that information elsewhere. But what I did learn, what I couldn't have gotten from a YouTube tutorial or a boot camp, was that I could hold my own. I came from a really poor background, welfare, chaos, instability. I didn't have the polish or the connections or the easy confidence that came with money. But sitting in those classrooms, doing that work, I realized I was just as smart, sometimes smarter, than people who'd had every advantage. That mattered. Not because it made me better than anyone, but because it let me see myself differently. It gave me proof that I belonged in rooms I'd previously believed I had no business being in. And here's the reality. Getting a Harvard degree turned out to be the official stamp on my Better Life passport. After I graduated, I was headhunted for a job I never applied for. To this day, I'm not entirely sure how they found me, except that I know they must have been scanning for people with Ivy League degrees. That was the filter. And once I got in, I understood why. I was surrounded by people who thought at the same level I do, not because we all went to fancy schools, but because the people hiring were using that degree as a shortcut to find a certain kind of thinker. Gatekeeping like that isn't fair. Being considered for a job because you have an Ivy degree shouldn't be the only way, but it's reality. So when someone tells you college is unnecessary, ask yourself, who's saying it and what do they want from you? Are they offering you a genuine alternative path, or are they just looking for workers who can perform a task while they reserve the deeper education, the kind that builds critical thinkers and leaders, for their own kids? I saw a TikTok recently about a young Black woman breaking into tech who chose college over a bootcamp. Her reasoning was direct. As a Black woman, she knew she would be held to a higher standard. Having a close friend who made the same decision for the same reason, her story hit home. She knew the industry's talking points. Skills matter more than credentials. But she also knew the reality. Boot camps might work for some, but she didn't want to risk it. And she believed it would be easier if she had a college background. When you're already facing barriers, you can't afford to add another one. The credential might not make you more skilled, but it makes you less dismissible. This is the tension we're living in. College is too expensive. It doesn't guarantee success. The old path is broken. All of that is true, but the people with the most power are still using it. They're just not advertising that part. The old system was like a train. You bought a ticket, you got on, you stayed on the tracks, and eventually, hopefully, you arrived at a station called career. It wasn't perfect, it's expensive, it doesn't work for everyone, but it's predictable. You know what to expect. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. For some people, this new openness is liberating. They can learn faster, cheaper, and in ways that actually fit their life. They can skip the parts that don't matter to them and go deep on the things that do. A teenager in a small town can learn graphic design from professionals halfway around the globe. A parent working 2 jobs can take night courses online and change careers. Someone who doesn't learn well in classrooms can finally find a way that works for them. But here's the thing we need to start saying out loud. The reason so many people are being forced into an alternative path isn't because it's better. It's because we've made the traditional path unaffordable. We've turned higher education into a luxury, and then we act like people are choosing not to go. But it's not a choice when the cost is crushing. It's not a choice when going to college means going into debt that follows you for decades. If college didn't cost what it costs, we wouldn't be having this conversation the same way. Because the question wouldn't be, can I afford 4 years? It would be, do I want 4 years to grow, to explore, to figure out who I am before the world demands I already know? And that's a very different question. I got my first degree because I moved to Oregon, lived there for a year, worked, established residency just so I could pay in-state tuition, because that was the only way I could afford it. I shouldn't have had to do that. Nobody should. But people do it all the time. They delay, they move, they sacrifice, not because they're not smart enough or driven enough, but because the system prices them out before they even begin. And that matters more than we admit. Because poor kids like I was, we need that time even more. We need the space to relearn things we never got taught in the first place. We need exposure to ideas, to people, to ways of thinking that we've never encountered. Wealthy kids get that at home. They grow up learning how to communicate, how to negotiate, how to think critically, how money works, how power moves. They walk into college already halfway there. The rest of us, we're starting from scratch. I did great in college. I got a full scholarship eventually, for talent I didn't even know I had. But I never would have found that if I hadn't had the space to explore, if I hadn't had structured time to try things, fail at things, discover what I was actually good at. You can't do that when every decision is about survival. You can't do that when you're working 3 jobs just to stay enrolled. So yes, academia needs an overhaul. It's been resting on its laurels for too long, charging more and delivering less. Yes, we need better career prep, clearer pathways, more practical skills. But we also need to stop pretending that the solution is to just skip college altogether and teach yourself online. For some people that works, but for a lot of us, what we actually need is access. We need the cost to come down. We need states to fund education. We need people to be able to go to college because they want to learn, not just because they can afford to. Because when education is only available to people who can pay, we lose something we can't get back. We lose the people who could have been brilliant, who could have changed things, but never got the chance to find out who they were capable of becoming. Too many of us are thinking about it wrong. College was never just about the classes. It was about time to grow up away from home, time to meet people who thought differently than you, time to make mistakes in a place that was kind of designed for that. It was about late-night conversations in dorm rooms, about changing your major twice, about reading books that had nothing to do with your career, but everything to do with how you saw the world. It was about becoming someone, not just learning something, and you can't get that from a tutorial or a boot camp or a certification program. Those things teach you skills, they're good at that, but they don't give you years to figure out who you are. They don't give you a community of people all trying to grow up at the same time. They don't give you permission to explore ideas that might not have any practical use, but might change how you think forever. So maybe what we're really mourning isn't the death of higher education. Maybe it's the loss of that protected space, that time to explore, to fail, to become, and the question of whether we can find that anywhere else. Some people are trying other paths. There are gap year programs where young people travel and learn and build things together. There are apprenticeships that pay you to learn while you work. There are online communities where people teach each other and hold each other accountable. There are fellowship programs, mentorship programs, co-living experiments. The pieces are there, but they're scattered. There's no single path anymore, and for a lot of people, that's hard. What comes after college is changing too. It's becoming many things. It's a world where learning never stops, where you're always building the next version of yourself, where the question isn't, what did you study, but what did you make? Where the people who thrive are the ones who can teach themselves, who can adapt, who can prove their value in ways that don't fit neatly on a resume. That world is already here, and it's asking something new of us. It's asking us to take responsibility for our own learning, to be honest about what we actually need to know, and to stop waiting for permission to become the person we want to be. It's asking us to be comfortable with uncertainty, to trust ourselves when there's no clear path, to keep learning even when no one's handing us a certificate for it. I spent a lot of my life being told what to think, what to believe, what path to follow. But the real learning, the kind that changed everything, that happened when I started questioning, when I started asking, does this actually feel true to me? When I stopped outsourcing my growth to whatever system said it had the answers. The degree isn't dead, but its power is fading, and in its place, something else is emerging. Something messier, more personal, that puts the weight of learning back on us. That's harder, but maybe it's also more honest. Because in the end, no piece of paper can make you capable. No institution can hand you curiosity. No credential can give you the courage to try something you might fail at. Only you can do that. The question isn't whether college is worth it. The question is, what are you going to do with whatever path you choose? How are you going to keep learning when nobody's making you? And how are you going to prove what you can do when there's no template to follow? Those are the questions that matter now, and maybe they're the questions that always mattered. Thanks for listening. I'm Luma from This Online Life.